are these people?
I brought this is Caitlin Johnstone, who we tend to like. And SharePost picked up her reporting here. So I thought it would be an interesting thing because I think it's an interesting story, especially when we've been seeing a lot of these. I feel like we've been seeing a lot of the mainstream media try to rescind their Ukraine narrative a little bit, right? I don't know if you've been seeing that. I feel like they've been trying to walk a lot of stuff back. They've recently had to say things like, oh, they took away that neo-Nazi symbol, so they're cool now. Anyway, so Caitlin begins to say, so contrary to widespread triumphant Western narratives, this reporting describes Ukrainian troops surviving on 1 potato per day and deserting their posts, right? The Washington Post has published an acknowledgement that the Ukraine's war against Russia has not been nearly the cakewalk that much of the public has been led to believe. In Ukrainian volunteer fighters in the East feel abandoned, WaPo reports that contrary to the triumphant narratives that the Western world is being spoon-fed, many troops in eastern Ukraine have been surviving on 1 potato per day and deserting their posts because they feel their leaders have turned their backs on them and they're being sent to certain death. Stuck in their trenches, the Ukrainian volunteers lived off a potato per day as Russian forces pounded them with artillery and Grad rockets on a key eastern front line. Outnumbered, untrained, and clutching only light weapons, the men prayed for the barrage to end, the Washington Post reports, citing multiple named sources. Ukrainian leaders have projected and nurtured a public image of military invulnerability off their volunteer and professional forces triumphantly standing up to the Russian onslaught, the article reads. But the experience of Lapko and his group of volunteers offers a rare and more realistic portrait of the conflict and Ukraine's struggle to halt the Russian advance in parts of Donbass. Ukraine, like Russia, has provided scant information about deaths, injuries, or losses of military equipment. But after 3 months of war, this company of 120 men is down to 54 because of deaths, injuries, and desertions. So, not looking good for them so far. It's interesting WaPo is reporting this, though, for sure. Any thoughts so far, boys?
Yeah, it seems to me like they're trying to manufacture consent for more tens of billions of dollars. The best way to do that at this point, 3 months in, is, I think, making it seem as awful as it actually is. Because you have to convince the American public, like the Ukrainians are in real dire straits now. So I don't think they're telling the truth because they want to tell the truth. They're telling the truth because the truth means they can now manufacture consent pretty easily for more money to Ukraine. So I think that it's like even a broken clock is right twice a day kind of thing. They're not telling the truth because they wanna. They're telling the truth because Russia has Ukraine against the ropes right now, and that they need to send more money to their defense contractor buddies.
Right. So this is the Ukrainian, this is, I can never say this guy's name, Serdazan Ragavan, right, who posts a bunch on this stuff. So Ukraine leaders project an image of military invulnerability against Russia, but commanders offer a more realistic portrait of the war, where outgunned volunteers describe being abandoned by the military brass and facing certain death at the front, which he's posting this WaPo article, right? So WaPo reports that volunteer troops in that part of the country quickly found themselves in the crosshairs of war, feeling abandoned by their military superiors and struggling to survive. We are being sent to certain death, said one volunteer. We are not alone like this. We are many. Hours after the Post interviewed Lapko and Cruz, members of Ukraine's military security service arrived at their hotel and detained some of the men, accusing them of desertion, WaPo reports. The men contend that they were the ones who were deserted. Some commentators have remarked on how, at long last, we're seeing some realistic coverage of this war in the mainstream press. First major U.S. media I've seen to report catastrophic condition of Ukraine forces, collapsing Ukraine morale on the front seems obvious. We should know the truth about a war our government is so deeply invested in, tweeted journalist Mark Ames, a frequent critic of the mass media blackout on conditions in the Ukrainian military. And here's his tweet. First major U.S. media, right? So this might be the first article in mainstream publication that punctures the PR spin and secrecy of the foreign military that the U.S. is subsidizing. 2 commanders were arrested after they spoke to the Washington Post, painting an extremely grim picture. Michael Tracy tweeting that. And here's the, Ukrainian leaders have projected and nurtured a public image of military invulnerability, right? But after 3 months of war, the company of 120 men is down to 54. So he's just posting their article. But on Monday, Ukraine's military secret service arrived at the hotel and talks about them, getting arrested. This is indeed a major break from standard mainstream reporting on this conflict, which is normally more in line with this recent Newsweek article headlined Putin's elite soldiers getting wiped out as Russia makes mistakes. Sourced entirely in unevidenced claims by the British government and the military-industrial complex-funded neocon think tank Institute for the Study of War. So anyway, there it is. That's the reality on the front lines of this conflict that Westerners have been cheering on from their comfortable homes while calling anyone who advocates a negotiated peace settlement a Putin apologist and a Kremlin troll. Any of you got called that in the last couple of months, probably?
Little bit.
Little bit.
Not yet. But then
Not
again,
yet.
I don't talk much about Ukraine because I'm just like over it. So
Right.
Yeah.
So
I get called by domestic Democrats. They'll call me a Nazi 2 months ago when I talk about the Ottawa trucker protests, and then suddenly I'm like, now I'm an ultra communist Putin apologist, even though Putin's not a communist. But like, they flip flop depending on what I'm talking about.
Dirty tanky.
They don't know what the fuck. Well, they try to label me and they don't know what either of the labels mean.
Labels are bad. Okay. Stay independent out here. Anyway, so it continues. These big, brave sofa warriors have been on social media demanding that Ukrainians keep fighting in this way until they've secured total victory over Russia and reclaimed Crimea and the Donbass, tweeting Slava Ukraine with their blue and yellow flag emojis during the commercial breaks of their favorite TV show in between mouthfuls of Funyuns.
I'm
Fucking love
surprised
Caitlin.
they allowed this on their paper.
Well, this is Caitlin. This is Johnstone.
I know.
Right? Writing for SharePost, yeah. So, Westerners would be a lot less cavalier about demanding a foreign population keep fighting until total victory if they truly understood the horrors of war. Unfortunately, there's propaganda machine of the unprecedented sophistication that has spent generations preventing them from obtaining that very understanding. Caitlin killing this. So that's why they're so happy to throw endless Ukrainian lies into the gears of the imperial war machine, and that's why the WaPo article we are discussing here is receiving very little mainstream attention online as of this writing. It will be dismissed and ignored by empire managers and their brainwashed flock with a, you just can't hire good cannon fodder these days. Caitlin tweets, so you think Ukraine should give Putin the Donbass and Crimean neutrality to end a war Putin started? No, I think Ukraine should sacrifice rivers of blood serving as U.S. proxy cannon fodder for years to drain Moscow while you sit at home eating Pop-Tarts and tweeting. Pop-Tarts and Funyuns, Caitlin. What's going on at your house? Sounds like a good time. There's no real reckoning with exactly what's happening and exactly what these people are being called on to put themselves through. In the children's crayon drawing version of this war that lives in the heads of Western so-called centrists, this is a team of heroic good guys righteously beating the tar out of hordes of bad guys because that's what happens in the movies and on TV. But this is not the movies, and this is not TV. People are dying in a U.S. proxy war that was deliberately provoked by the U.S. centralized empire, and behind all the narratives and spin, they are ultimately doing so for nothing more noble than the agenda to secure U.S. unipolar hegemony. Many of the blue and yellow flag wavers are well-intentioned and really do think they are advocating for Ukrainian freedom and sovereignty, but in reality, they've been cheering for Ukrainian subservience and enslavement to the empire, Ukrainian death, Ukrainian suffering, and the continuation of a dangerous proxy war between nuclear superpowers that threatens the life of everyone on Earth. If I had a mic to drop for Caitlin, I would. Thoughts on that on that coverage from her.
Well, Caitlin always kills it. This is why she ends up on something like SheerPost nowadays, because she's just that talented. But
Yeah.
she makes great points here, and this really proves that what all the rest of us anti-war leftists were saying before this all really escalated is like, if it turns out that there's going to be a bunch of Ukrainian soldiers being thrown into a meat grinder, left out to dry, eating one potato a day, that was all the more reason to like, cater to Russia's demands right off the bat and avoid all this in the first place. So they're flip-flopping and kind of admitting, like tongue-in-cheek, that they've been wrong this entire time. And all the anti-war leftists who are saying, well, you know what, if you don't want a bunch of Ukrainians to go through a whole bunch of horrible things, maybe we should go to diplomacy of some sort. And
wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, right. And it wasn't that much. They weren't asking that much. Like Russia was saying that Crimea would become part of Russia. The Donbass, which is Luhansk and Donetsk, would have their own independent like republics that have their own elections, and there would and that Ukraine itself, Western Ukraine, which would be separate from the Donbass after this, would no longer try to get into NATO, and the US would no longer try to get them into NATO. I think those are pretty reasonable, and especially considering now, as it turns out, they're even admitting that Ukraine's getting wiped out and their soldiers are dying, they're starving, they're demoralized, they're quitting. Yeah, no shit. We told you guys this 3 months ago.
3 months ago.
It would have been nice. It would have been nice to save all those Ukrainian lives that inevitably led us to here anyway. So it's they had to start off with, we got to send some money to Ukraine because these people are heroes. Right. But now we're seeing the heroes get wiped out and they can't cover it up anymore. So they change to pity. So that's what they're using now. They're kind of flipping. I think it's almost impossible to cover up exactly how much Russia is kind of dominating it at this point. So if you want to manufacture consent for more money to go to Ukraine, they just switch gears and they go, well, Ukraine is obviously drained of resources. They don't have food and they're getting their asses kicked and there's no morale. The best way to combat that is just send them tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, what's happening right now. Caitlin goes over that perfectly. And it's not hard in America, in a highly propagandized society, to convince us of certain things like this, because we have, we've propaganda woven into our media in a way that they all see the Ukrainians as like Rambo or Schwarzenegger or the Expendables. They're the good guys. They're big and buff and they have all the right intentions and they're kicking ass over there. That our propaganda system is so deep and woven into our media here that it's easy to convince a population like the United States to forever endure their own suffering so that we can, quote unquote, help these, pitiful Ukrainians at this point.
Yeah. I mean, to me, this is like, it just shows that the narrative itself is falling apart, that even WaPo is having to like kind of give it some actual like reporting. Otherwise, they'll look stupid in 8 months if they continue,
Yeah, right. It was
right.
inevitable. The tides were going to turn. It's just a matter of at what point do each of these outlets admit it.
Right.
You can't keep saying the Ukrainians are winning while we can objectively see that the like walls are closing in on them when you look at the map every 2 weeks of what belongs to Russia versus what belongs to Ukraine. In what way are they winning? Like, they're not winning. They're getting surrounded. So, and it looks like I was watching Hinkle's show earlier. He's talking about there's like 15,000 Ukrainians in an area that is about to be completely surrounded by Russian troops and they might surrender. I mean, there's in no way I've seen that Ukraine is actually winning. And these outlets, if they do this for, let's say this goes on for a year and they spend 8 months telling everybody that Ukraine's kicking ass, it's going to look pretty ridiculous when it turns out that Russia takes over the whole country. They're gonna be like, whoopsie, sorry, what we've been saying to you for the last 9 months is we just couldn't get accurate information. Like,
right.
It just, so now they're trying to save face.
Our bad.
Yep. And so the WaPo just happens to be the first of these propaganda outlets that's going to fold. We'll just have to see. Eventually they're all going to have to give up and admit that, yeah, okay, whoops, the Ukraine isn't actually like winning anything. They're getting their ass kicked.
Right. Eventually, I'll like to see the mainstream media try to spin this. I mean, you're right. They're going to spin it as like they obviously need more aid and they obviously need more. It might be that they want to put troops there, right? Like, see, their troops are deserting and right. you know.
Yeah, so we have to replenish with boots on the ground. The also it could just be they want to save face for sending $40 billion, which they just did to Ukraine. Because if they say, well, we had to do it because look how bad the Ukrainians were doing, they flip their propaganda for that reason so that they can reconcile sending tens of billions, which is irreconcilable, in my opinion. They have to try to sell that to the American public. And the way you do that is through pity. You know, you send pictures of skinny Ukrainians and describe the horrible conditions that they're going through, the starvation that's running rampant. And then the American populace, in their mind, they're like, okay, well, then maybe I can, you know, make sense of that 40 billion we just sent over there. You know, they're trying to sell a proxy war that they're getting that isn't even panning out to be a proxy war because Russia's advancing so heavily. This hasn't turned into the quagmire that they even tried to make it. So now they're flipping.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. Any thoughts from you, Collin?
I mean, honestly, as I said, I haven't paid much attention, I will admit, but in part because this whole war is bullshit. It's basically nothing more than to make more money for the military industrial complex. It's just another way, as we're seeing, like, to get people to feel pity. So like either like to give the guys of, oh, we need to send them more money. And as Rob is saying, you know, like could be a way to potentially get more military troops, you know, like from here over there. The question is, I wonder who would want to, but I'm sure that's where it's going to be heading, you know, far before long. So, so, I mean, this is to be expected, you know, so it's kind of like same shit, different war, basically.
Yeah.